Hello everyone, this is Warhawk Beyond 2040 and welcome to a very special edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. And today I am going to be taking a look at the amazing and impressive catalogue from one of the greatest, most celebrated, decorated, respected and iconic sax players of all time, and is one of the most unique musicians in the history of music, and has been a major force on the European jazz scene since the 1960s, and is a cornerstone for the ECM label. And he is a gentleman who, quite frankly, in my opinion, needs no introduction whatsoever. I am talking about, of course, the one and only legendary Norwegian saxophonist, composer, and bandleader Jan Garbarek. So, ever since bursting onto the scene in the 1960s, Jan Garbarek has seen it all, done it all, and played and collaborated with just about everyone. From Bill Connors to David Darling to Trilok Gurtu to Zakhir Hussain to Kim Kashkashian to Manu Katche to Marilyn Mazur to Kenny Wheeler to Eberhard Weber to Bobo Stenson to Gary Peacock to Miroslav Vitous to Bobo Stenson to Keith Jarrett, and was a member of Keith Jarrett's legendary European quartet. And he has also played and collaborated with the Hilliard Ensemble. You name it, Jan Garbarek has played with them all. And Jan Garbarek, as a sax player, he is not what you would call your traditional jazz saxophonist. There's no one else quite like him. When you hear Jan Garbarek, you know straight away it's him, as he has such a very unique sound on the saxophone, and he incorporates a lot of different influences from Scandinavian to folk to Indian to chamber to avant-garde to classical, you name it. Jan Garbarek incorporates all of these different styles to create a very unique sound on the saxophone that involves lots of space and air. And he has these echo effects on the saxophone, which at times can sound like a wail or a shriek. You know, he doesn't just burn with an intensity like some of the other sax players. What Jan Garbarek has in terms of his approach to his instrument is quite different to what you'd expect to hear from most saxophonists. And that to me is what makes Jan Garbarek stand out from all the sax players in the pack. As I said, there's no one else that sounds like him. Jan Garbarek is in a league of his own. And what can I say, really? Jan Garbarek is very unique. And I've seen him 5 times live. Very special musician. Amazing shows. Unbelievable musician. He is such an icon in what he does. And in terms of his field, I would put Jan Garbarek as probably the greatest of all time in terms of what he does and his approach. And his music is not really what you would call jazz as such. Yes, there is the jazz element to it. There's chamber, there's classical, there's new age, there's ambience. Obviously, there's a bit of avant-garde in there as well. And some people have said that Jan Garbarek's music sounds like Kenny G meets Tangerine Dream. That really depends on how you listen to it and how you view his music. But Jan Garbarek's music is not like what you'd hear from other musicians on the ECM label. A lot of his music has a lot of electronics. It's very heavily orchestrated, lots of soundscapes. As I said, there's nobody else that sounds quite like Jan Garbarek. Yes, there are a lot of European sax players like Tor Brunborg and Bendik Hofseth. They do sound like Jan Garbarek, but when you hear Jan Garbarek, you know it's him because, as I said, there's no one else in the world that sounds quite like him. And Jan Garbarek has a massive catalogue and has put out a lot of different albums in his legendary career. But for today's special edition, I am going to be taking a look at Jan Garbarek's catalogue of albums from 1987 to 2009. And this period in Jan Garbarek's career was a very unique one because a lot of the music that he was putting out at the time was very different to what other musicians were putting out on the ECM label at the time. A lot of musicians on the ECM label, they were putting out music that was very out there, very wild, and that leaned more towards avant-garde, while other musicians were putting out very straight ahead type of music. Some were putting out very fusion driven type of music. But the kind of music that Jan Garbarek was putting out was very laid back, it was very atmospheric and very ambient with lots of European and world influences. And at times it sounded very similar to the New Age style of music, and it was very heavily orchestrated and very chamber driven. And there were very few people who were doing this kind of music. The only other two names that come to mind in this sort of style of music was Pat Metheny with the Pat Metheny Group and Oregon. There weren't really that many acts on the ECM label at the time that was doing this sort of music. And this period, in my opinion, commercially was Jan Garbarek's most successful run. And for me, this puts Jan Garbarek on the map as an international star. He was already respected prior to doing this sort of music, but I feel that once he started to develop his own sound on the saxophone and started doing this sort of music, that was when he really, to me, became the man that we know. So, as always, I am going to be talking about each album individually, and I'll be choosing which one I think is the best one. I can honestly tell you now, there is no bad album in this catalogue from Jan Garbarek. There are some albums that are excellent, there are some albums that are legendary, and there are some that are just fantastic. There are no bad albums in this catalogue from this period of Jan Garbarek's career. Any one of these albums could easily be a number one or the best because they're so good. They're so well produced, which of course is no surprise because it's ECM, courtesy of the one and only Manfred Eicher, who is quite frankly just magic. He has got magic hands. Anything he touches turns to gold, and he knows how to get the best sound, not just from the musicians, but from the albums as well. And as I said, any of these albums could easily be a favourite because they're so good. And this is a hard one because I love all of these albums. They're so different because, as I said, Jan Garbarek is a very unique musician. And obviously, he has his sound, he has his voice, but none of these albums sound the same. They're all different. And I think that's a true testament to Jan Garbarek's composing and arranging. He knows how to write a song, and he's never one to repeat himself. He's always coming up with different ideas, different concepts, and different environments. And a lot of the musicians he collaborates on these albums, he doesn't really change it around. He has his set group of collaborators that he works with, and they're just as important as him. They're all unique and brilliant musicians. And even though it's Jan Garbarek's name at the top, I really get the sense, like the Pat Metheny Group, it's a band. This isn't just one guy telling everyone else what to do. Everyone contributes and adds to the music. And for me, that's what makes this catalogue, this portion of his career, so special. So we're going to start with the first album that kick-started this period of Jan Garbarek's career. And this one came out in 1987. And it's an absolute classic, and it still gets talked about a lot to this day. And it's the perfect place to start if you're looking to get into Jan Garbarek's music, and certainly this period of his career. And this one is called All Those Born with Wings. So after many years of putting out lots of different albums and plenty of very out there and wild music, Jan Garbarek puts out a solo album which features Jan Garbarek playing all of the instruments from keyboards to electronics to tenor and soprano saxophones to flutes to pipes to percussion, you name it. Jan Garbarek plays everything on this album, and it's a very different kind of album to what you'd expect from Jan Garbarek. The music is very dark, very brooding, very ominous, and very laid back and atmospheric as well. And for me, this was the beginning of Jan Garbarek becoming the man that we would know today. It's a lovely album, very lush, lots of different soundscapes, very new age-ish, although Garbarek has never really called his music new age. It's kind of hard not to make those comparisons, but it's still lovely music, and Jan Garbarek sounds absolutely amazing, as you'd expect. And the material that's featured on here is the title track, but it's made up of 6 parts. So we got the first track is called First Piece, then we got the next track called Second Piece, then Third Piece, then Fourth Piece, then Fifth Piece, and Sixth Piece. So it's basically 6 pieces that make up the title track. And what more can you expect from Jan Garbarek? It just sounds absolutely beautiful. And the standout tracks for me are the first piece, third piece, fourth piece, and fifth piece. But the whole album, from top to bottom, is absolutely amazing. And Jan Garbarek, as great as he is on the saxophone, he's a good keyboard player as well. He can come up with lots of different textural sounds and soundscapes on the keyboards. He's a brilliant keyboard player. But obviously, where it's at is, of course, the saxophone. And as I said, when you listen to Jan Garbarek, he doesn't sound like your traditional sax player. He's very different. And as I said at the beginning, a very unique musician. There's nobody else in the world that sounds quite like him. And as I said, when you hear Jan Garbarek, you know straight away it's him because there's no one else quite like him. Very unique and talented musician. So there you have it. All those Born with Wings, an excellent album and the start of what I consider to be Jan Garbarek's most unique and enjoyable period of his legendary career. Excellent stuff. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1988, and it's a fantastic follow up to All Those Born with Wings, and this one is called Legend of the Seven Dreams. So, Legend of the Seven Dreams sees Jan Garbarek continue the style of music that he started on back on All Those Born with Wings, and this time it features 3 musicians, 2 that would go on to become important collaborators in Jan Garbarek's career. So we've got Jan Garbarek on tenor and soprano sax and percussion and flute. And we've got Rainer Bruninghaus on keyboards, Eberhard Weber on bass, and Nana Vasconcelos on percussion and voice. Now, Rainer Bruninghaus and Eberhard Weber, as I mentioned, will go on to become the cornerstones of Jan Garbarek's working band dubbed the Jan Garbarek Group, and Bruninghaus's keyboards and Weber's bass would help shape the sound of Jan Garbarek's band and his music. And when you hear Jan Garbarek, a lot of the sound is the bass and the keyboards, and they create this very atmospheric and orchestrated type of sound that makes the Jan Garbarek's music what it is. And what more can you say about those guys? They are the absolute best musicians in the world. And just like Jan Garbarek, they are cornerstones for the ECM label, as is Nana Vasconcelos as well. He's another great musician as well, very unique percussionist, and done some amazing stuff with the Pat Metheny group. He's just super talented. So all of the music is written and composed by Jan Garbarek. So we got the first track, He Comes from the North, which is absolutely beautiful. Out Shuri, the Songman, another great track as well. Tongue of Secrets is absolutely beautiful. Brother Wind is gorgeous. Its name is Secret Road, which sees Jan Garbarek play solo flute. Very haunting sound he has on flute. Send Word, another great song as well. Voi Cantando is another great song as well. And Mirrorstone Parts 1 and 2, which features Jan Garbarek on solo soprano sax. Absolutely lovely, as is all of the material from top to bottom. Just incredible music. Really is. As I said, very different to what other musicians were putting out on the ECM label. And the standout tracks for me are Ash Shuri, The Songman, Brother Wind, Its Name is Secret Road, Send Word, Mirrorstone 1 and Mirrorstone 2. But the whole album, from top to bottom, is excellent. A little bit underrated, doesn't get talked about as much, but still a fantastic album nonetheless. And this would mark the beginning of the Jan Garbarek group that we would all come to know. But it's a great follow-up to All Those Born with Wings. So there you have it. Legend of the Seven Dreams. Absolutely beautiful and a great album. Love it. Great stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1990, and it's one of my all-time favourites from Jan Garbarek, and it's one of his absolute best ever. And this one is called I Took Up the Runes. So after two amazing albums, Legend of the Seven Dreams and All Those Born with Wings, Jan Garbarek returns once again in that style of music, but this time with a full working band comprised of most of his main collaborators. So on this album, we've got Rainer Bruninghaus on piano, Eberhard Weber on bass, Nana Vasconcelos on percussion, Manu Katche on drums, and additional members Bujay Wesolov on synthesizer and Ingor Anti Algub on vocals, and Jan Garbarek, of course, on tenor and soprano saxophones. And this, for me, is really when Jan Garbarek was really starting to come into his own, and some of his most well-known compositions are on this album. It's an absolute classic, and what more can I say, really? I love this album, and I've seen Jan Garbarek play quite a good chunk of this album many times. It's absolutely beautiful, very haunting, very atmospheric, and at times very laid back. And it's just classic Jan Garbarek. Doesn't get any better than this. And all of the compositions are written and composed by Jan Garbarek, and it's just an amazing album. It really is. So we got the first track, Gula Gula, which is absolutely beautiful. And then we got the 5-part epic called Mold Canticule, which is made up of 5 parts, and it's just absolutely beautiful. It's probably the centerpiece of I Took Up the Runes. It's just an amazing piece of music, and I've seen Jan Garbarek play this live, and it was just amazing. It's just one of those things you have to really experience in person to appreciate it. It's just a fantastic piece of music and one of Jan Garbarek's most well-known compositions. We've got His Eyes Were Suns, absolutely beautiful. Then we got the title track, I Took Up the Runes, which is excellent stuff. Then we got Buena Hora, Buenas Vintos, which is excellent. And then we've got Raki Sreruiz, which is a beautiful arrangement by Jan Garbarek. But the whole album, from top to bottom, is just excellent. It's a fantastic album, one of Jan Garbarek's best albums ever, and one of my all-time favourites from him. And the standout tracks for me is, of course, Mold Kantkitil, which is, as I said, made up of 5 parts. That's the standout track for me. All 5 parts are just excellent. And I Took Up the Runes, which is another great track as well. But the whole album, from top to bottom, is excellent, and it's one of his absolute best ever. So there you have it. I Took Up the Runes, one of the best Jan Garbarek albums ever, and one of my all-time favourites, and features many of Jan Garbarek's classic compositions. Tremendous stuff. Love it. So now we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1993. And for me, this could probably be my all-time favorite Jan Garbarek album of this entire catalogue from this period. And I've seen him play most of these compositions as well, and it's an absolute classic. And this one is called 12 Moons. So the Jan Garbarek group is officially born, and we've got most of Jan Garbarek's main collaborators. So we've got Jan Garbarek on saxophones, Rainer Bruninghaus on keyboards, Eberhard Weber on bass, Manu Katche on drums, Marilyn Mazur on percussion, Agnes Björn Garnaz on vocals, and Marie Bonnet on vocals. For me, this is the classic lineup of the Jan Garbarek group. You know, when I think of the Jan Garbarek group, I think of this group of musicians in particular. This is where the Jan Garbarek group really was born, and this is, for me, the best music they ever made together. It's an absolute classic, and some of Jan Garbarek's most legendary songs came from this album. So we've got the title track, 12 Moons, Part 1, Winter Summer, Part 2, Summer Winter, which kind of sounds like Tangerine Dream with a saxophone. It's absolutely haunting. There's even some little moments where it sounds like PMG. It's just absolutely amazing. Passam is hauntingly beautiful with soprano sax and Eberhard Weber's bass and Agnes's vocals. It's just absolutely lovely. Brother Wind March is an excellent track. There Were Swallows, which is another beautiful track. The Tall Tier Trees is excellent. Arietta is another great track as well. Gontes Margit, which is almost 12 minutes long. It's just absolutely beautiful. And then we've got Davanan, which is a lovely track as well. Huhai is another great track as well, and Wichitatu, which is one of Jan Garbarek's most memorable compositions ever. The whole album is just tremendous from top to bottom, and the standout tracks for me are 12 Moons, Passam, Brother Wind March, There Were Swallows, The Tall Tier Trees, Huhai, and Wichitatu. But the whole album from top to bottom is excellent, and 12 Moons could very well be my all-time favourite Jan Garbarek album. It's just an absolute classic. So there you have it. 12 Moons, quite possibly the best Jan Garbarek album out of this portion of his catalogue. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1986, and it's another great one from Jan Garbarek, and this one is called Visible World. So we see Jan Garbarek return with his working band, featuring the same musicians as 12 Moons, but this time we got another musician added to the mix, which is of course Trilok Gurtu. And Visible World is just remarkable. It's absolutely amazing and a great continuation to 12 Moons. It's just a lovely album. And we've got Jan Garbarek on soprano and tenor saxophones, keyboards, percussion, and maraca clarinet. Rainer Bruninghaus on piano and keyboards, Eberhard Weber on bass, Marilyn Mazur on drums and percussion, Manu Katche on drums, Trilok Gurtu on tabla, and Marie Bonnet on vocals. Excellent stuff. All of the compositions are beautiful. They're all written and composed by Jan Garbarek. It's just an amazing album. And it's quite a long album as well. We've got like 15 tracks, so it's quite a long album, but a very good album nonetheless. We've got the short and sweet Red Wind, which is excellent. The Creek, which features hard-hitting drumming from Manu Katche. The Survivor is beautiful. The Healing Smoke is brilliant. The title track, Visible World, is great. Desolate Mountains 1 and Desolate Mountains 2, both great tracks. And we got Visible World, which is essentially like part 2 of Visible World Cairo, and this is Visible World Skuro. Gugliette is another great track as well. Desolate Mountains Free, beautiful. Pygmy Lullaby is great. The Quest, lovely. The Arrow is great. The Sife is great. And Evening Land is another great song as well. But every composition from top to bottom is just excellent. And Jan Garbarek is really hitting his peak here. And all of the other musicians are on top form. Rainer Bruninghaus bringing that electronic soundscapes to the music, Eberhard Weber bringing his haunting bass work, and Marilyn Mazur, Manu Katche, and Trilok Gurtu bringing lots of great percussive work. And Mary Bonnet is just got such a lovely, very soothing voice as well. Everyone is on top form, and of course, Jan Garbarek, he's on great form all the time. And the standout tracks for me are Red Wind, The Creek, The Healing Smoke, Pygmy Lullaby, The Quest, The Arrow, and Evening Land. Excellent album and a great follow up to 12 Moons. Just absolutely classic Jan Garbarek. Love it. Great album. So there you have it. Visible World. Brilliant stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 1998, and it's a double album, and it's considered by many to be Jan Garbarek's true masterpiece, the ultimate album, his greatest album ever, and it still gets talked about to this day, and rightly so. And this for me was the album that truly cemented Jan Garbarek as one of the all-time greats and one of the cornerstones for the ECM label. And the album I'm talking about is, of course, Rights. So for me, Rights is the album that cemented Jan Garbarek as one of the true legends for the ECM label, and he really hit his peak here. Compositionally, musically, he's on top form, as are all of his main collaborators, and it's just a fantastic album. And when you talk about classic Jan Garbarek albums like I Took Up the Runes, 12 Moons, you've got to put Rights at the top. You know, if I was to choose three albums that would make up the ultimate trilogy of Jan Garbarek albums, it would be those three. You cannot talk about Jan Garbarek without mentioning Rights, because this for me is the ultimate Jan Garbarek album, and he really shines brightly on this album, and his playing is just off the charts, and the sounds he comes up with on the tenor and soprano sax is just unbelievable. And he also plays keyboards as well, and he's just blown on all cylinders. He's never sounded better than he does on Rights. And all of the compositions are written and composed by Jan Garbarek, with the exception of two tracks, one by Don Cherry and the other by Jan Zorg Kagzede. But it's all Jan Garbarek, very electronic driven, very atmospheric, very orchestral. You name it, it's all there. And of course, he's not alone. We've got Rainer Bruninghaus on keyboards, Eberhard Weber on bass, Marilyn Mazur on percussion and drums, Yangsug Kagizidi on additional keyboards, and Bobo Stenson as conductor. But excellent double album. Doesn't get any better than this. It's just all memorable music. So on disc one, we've got the title track Rights, which is 8 minutes long, very haunting, very electronic driven, very atmospheric, and really helps set the tone for what this album is going to be all about. Where the Rivers Meet is just classic Jan Garbarek, and the middle part where you hear the tenor sax overdubbed with the soprano sax is just one of the true highlights of this entire album. It's probably my favourite Jan Garbarek song of the entire album. And it goes a little something like this. Love it. Just gives me chills. Then we got Vast Plain Clouds, excellent song. So mild the wind, so meek the water, beautiful. Song Tread Lightly is another great song as well. It's okay to listen to the grey voice is brilliant. Her Wild Ways is another great song as well. And then on disc two, we've got It's High Time, another great song. One Yin for Every Yang is excellent. Pan is another great song. We Are the Stars is another great song. The Moon over Mittadsminder is great. Malinye is another great song. The White Clown is great. Evenly They Danced, and The Last Rite is just excellent and a very haunting and brooding way to close out this album. But the whole album is just top to bottom. Both discs are brilliant. And the standout tracks for me on disc one are Right, Where the Rivers Meet, Vast Plain Clouds, So Mild the Wind, So Meek the Water, and Her Wild Ways. But wow, what a first disc. Jan Garbarek on top form, Rainer Bruninghaus bringing lots of electronic soundscapes, Eberhard Weber really going for that Jaco Pastorius type of bass playing. He's just on top form. Marilyn Mazur bringing lots of her gorgeous percussive work on percussion and drums. Brilliant stuff. And the standout tracks for me on disc two are It's High Time, One Yin for Every Yang, We Are the Stars, The White Clown, and Last Rite. But the whole album, both discs, from top to bottom, is tremendous. So there you have it. Right. The ultimate Jan Garbarek album, and still to this day, in my opinion, his best work ever. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2004. And this would actually mark the final ever studio album that Jan Garbarek would put out, featuring all new material. He hasn't made another studio album since. And if this is indeed the final ever studio album from Jan Garbarek, which for all intents and purposes is shaping up to be that way, what a way to go out. And this album is very different to Jan Garbarek's previous albums, where we saw Jan Garbarek working in much more larger ensembles. This sees Jan Garbarek performing in a much more smaller setting and a lot more stripped down. And for me, he has never sounded better than he does on this album. And the one I'm talking about is, of course, In Praise of Dreams. So, In Praise of Dreams features Jan Garbarek performing in a trio setting, but this is not what you would call your traditional trio. This features Jan Garbarek playing tenor and soprano saxophones, keyboards, percussion, and heavy use of samplers. And we've got Kim Kashkashian on viola and longtime collaborator Manu Katche on drums and looped electronic drums and sampled drums as well. And wow, absolutely beautiful. Much more laid back than his previous albums, but highly enjoyable and very atmospheric and very ambient as well. And Jan Garbarek has never sounded better than he does in this environment. As I said, all of his albums are very different. You know, they don't all sound the same. They still sound like Jan Garbarek, but not quite Jan Garbarek. It's a little bit different. And all of the compositions are written and composed by Jan Garbarek, and it's just absolutely brilliant. So we got A Scene from Above, which is a great opener. Then we got In Praise of Dreams, the title track, which is one of the real standouts of this album. One Goes There Alone, which is excellent. Not of Place and Time, another great song as well. If You Go Far Enough is beautiful. Seen from Afar is great. Cloud of Unknowing is brilliant. Without Visible Sign is great. Iceburn is beautiful. Conversation with a Stone is excellent. And A Tale Begun, which is kind of like a solo sax piece, but more like a reprise of the title track In Praise of Dreams. But every track from top to bottom is excellent. Jan Garbarek sounds amazing on tenor and soprano sax and on keyboards. Kim Kashkashian brings lots of great colouring with her viola playing. And Manu Katche, he's just a beast on the drums. but he plays in a much more restrained and subdued, laid back style. So it's not just crash bang wallop. He plays it almost like percussion, and it's very well done. And Manu Katche, one of the absolute best drummers in the world, and he's been a main collaborator for Jan Garbarek for a lot of years. He's pretty much featured on most of these albums, and he sounds absolutely amazing. And the standout tracks for me are As Seen From Above, In Praise of Dreams, One Goes Far There Alone, A Tale Begun, Conversation with a Stone, and Without Visible Sign. Excellent album. If this is indeed the final studio album from Jan Garbarek, what a way to go out. Absolutely beautiful. So there you have it. In Praise of Dreams, classic Jan Garbarek album, and a very different one as well. Love it. Great stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2009, and it's a double live album. And this one features Jan Garbarek in concert with his working band, the Jan Garbarek Group, and it's a rare treat and a very special one to hear Jan Garbarek in concert. And for me, it's one of the best live albums I've ever heard from the ECM label. And this one is simply called Dresden. So Dresden features the Jan Garbarek Group. So we got Jan Garbarek on soprano and tenor saxophones and flute. Longtime collaborators Rainer Bruninghaus on piano and keyboards, Manu Katche on drums, and Yuri Daniel on bass, who replaces longtime bassist Eberhard Weber. And wow, these guys sound absolutely tight as a quartet. And Yuri Daniel, the youngest member of the four, he really at times sounds like Eberhard Weber, but at times he also sounds like Jaco Pastorius. But he's very much his own man, and he's a tremendous bass player. And to actually hear these guys performing live in concert is a real treat. And anybody who has seen Jan Garbarek live, it's an amazing experience. It really is. So, as I said, Dresden is a double live album, and it features many of Jan Garbarek's classic compositions. So, on disc one, we got Paper Nut, which is a great opener. The Tall Tier, Trees is another. High Tor is another great track. The legendary 12 Moons is just remarkable. Rondo Amoroso is great. Tau is another great track. Milagre dos Pixies is another great track as well. And then on disc two, we've got There Were Swallows, The Reluctant Saxophonist, Transformations, Once I Dreamt a Tree Upside Down, Fuji, Maracuja, Grooving Out are great songs as well. New Bine is another great song, and Voy Cantacando is another great song as well. But it's a great live performance, and I've seen Jan Garbarek many times, and it's pretty much near enough the same set that he played when I saw him. It's just absolutely fantastic, and all four musicians sound incredible live, and they're all on top form. Jan Garbarek is on great form, playing tenor and soprano saxes and flute. Rainer Bruninghaus, who for me is the real difference maker of the band, he brings lots of lush electronic soundscapes with his keyboards and creates a lot of wind effects that sounds like Jan Garbarek is playing on a mountain. Yuri Daniel, excellent bass player and really knows how to channel the spirits of Eberhard Weber and Jaco Pastorius. He's just an amazing bass player and really beefs up the band. And Manu Katche, he's just an amazing drummer and he really beefs up the sound. And Daniel and Katche make an excellent rhythm section. They sound really tight, and the whole band are just on top form. They really are. And standout tracks for me are Paper Nuts on disc one, The Tall Tier Trees, 12 Moons, and on disc two, There Were Swallows, The Reluctant Saxophonist, Transformations, Grooving Out, and Once I Dreamt a Tree Upside Down. But excellent live album. one of the best live albums ECM have put out, and great production as you'd expect, courtesy of Manfred Eicher. It's just absolutely brilliant. If you really want to experience what young Garbarek sounds like in concert, this is the one for you. Absolutely amazing. So there you have it. Dresden, brilliant live album from the young Garbarek group. Tremendous stuff. So which young Garbarek album do I think is the best one? Well, as I said at the beginning, as far as this period of young Garbarek's career is concerned, there's no bad album. They're all excellent. Some of them are classics, some of them are brilliant, and some are just absolute legendary. And you can't go wrong with any of them. Any of these albums could easily be the best or a number one or an all-time favorite. But if I had to choose one young Garbarek album that I would say is his absolute best ever, without question, we're going with Right. This for me was the album that not only puts young Garbarek on the map as one of the all-time greats, but he really peaked as a composer and as a musician. And I don't think he has ever sounded better than he does on Right. He just is on top form, and some of his most memorable compositions are from this album. He really peaked here, and I still consider this album to this day to be his best work ever. So there you have it. Right, the one that I consider to be the absolute best young Garbarek album ever. But that's not to say that the other albums are not to be sniffed at. They're all great, but for me, this is the one that really stands above all of his albums, and it's just an absolute classic and one that I would definitely recommend to anybody out there who wants to check out young Garbarek's albums. In fact, I would even go out and say just buy all of his albums. They're all good. Obviously, start with this one, but just get all of the ones that I mentioned. They're all fantastic. So there you have it. Right, the best young Garbarek album ever. Love it. So that's going to be it from me. I'm going to wrap this up now. What's your favourite young Garbarek album? Is it All Those Born with Wings, Legend of the Seven Dreams, I Took Up the Runes, 12 Moons, Visible World, Rights, In Praise of Dreams, or Dresden? There's no right or wrong answer. We all have our favourite albums. You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Jazz Albums Review Series. So until then, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.